Ani nindawe magadanduk, nigagwe gitbagas, bine sikwe, itigo makon dodeum gawababani kag, ishkaniganing in dunjba. Language. Greeting you in the language from my territory, which is northern Minnesota. Do you all know where Minnesota is? Okay. I think we might be neck and neck on the coldest area. Not sure. But thank you for the honor of being here with you tonight. And I'm telling you where I'm from. It's the White Earth Reservation, which is the headwaters of the Mississippi and the Red Rivers. I can hear this feedback. Can you guys hear this too? Or is it just in my head? So should I stand right here? Is it okay still? Okay, bonjour, Kevin. It's one guy from my community. You always got to watch out when you go out in the big world. You one guy from your community there to make sure you don't blow it. Anyway, I'm very honored to be here with you tonight, and I thought I'd talk a little bit about my community. There's a book out here, which there's a copy of here. This is the cover of it, and the lecture I'm giving tonight is on Indigenous Sustainability. But I want to say that the whole book is downloadable for free on the internet from the Honor the Earth website, which is this graphic. I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I'm from. Can we go to that next slide? Let's see what that one looks like. Oh, there we go. Very good. My community is Anishinaabeg. We're the northern part of 5 American states and the southern part of 4 Canadian provinces. We're one of the largest Indigenous communities in North America, about 250,000 of us, 19 reservations in the U.S., and about 100 reserves in Canada. We're Algonquin speakers. We've been there a pretty dang long time. We are the northernmost corn growers in the world. We push corn about 100 miles north of Winnipeg. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. We have old people. Just south of my reservation a couple years ago, they were digging for a lakeshore housing development, of course, and they came across a 7,000-year-old ancestor with a copper spear point in his hip. And that copper spear point did not come from my area, you know? So we've been there a while, and we got really old food. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about my 800-year-old squash. That's pretty old, huh? And we are people who have riced for a really long time, and we have a really old religious practice. In our area, it's Medewin, which is, I don't know, they maybe say around 5,000 years old. So we've been here a while. We have a few thoughts about sustainability that kind of go with that terrain. I was over on this reservation. I think it's about 4 reservations over. That's how I count it. Bad River. It's in northern Wisconsin. And I was interviewing the tribal chair this summer because they're fighting a big mine up there. And he was talking about how he couldn't understand why they wanted to do this big mine. You know, we understand the concept of profit and exploitation. We're onto that one. But, you know, the whole idea, like, of the thinking behind it. And he said this, I like what he said. He said, sometimes it seems like people are not interested in sticking around for another 1,000 years. And I reflect on that, you know, because we come from, you know, all of us come from people that have been here a long time. What is it like to be thinking about what it's going to be like 1,000 years from now, and that you want to stick around for that, you know? So this is a little bit about my community, and I wanted to present this to you because because art reflects culture, because I'm someone that believes that that multiculturalism is as important, or cultural diversity is as important as biological diversity. You don't want a monocrop of either. It's dangerous. And you lose something that is really precious. Like the fact that in our language, Anishinaabe-Moan, the word for stone is animate. It's an animate noun. That a lot of our nouns are animate, which means that those are relatives and they have spirit and they have standing unto themselves. And that is a lot different than the commodification that occurs in the modern society where, you know, where it used to be called corn and now it's called an agricultural resource. Or a forest is alive and is an animate noun, yeah? But now it's called a timber resource or board feet. It's a different worldview. And how language, or in this case art, reflects cultural values. It is important, I think, at this point where we are, to consider that it might be worth getting out of our boxes and recovering and experiencing this broader worldview that it's okay. So this is art from my community. I'm going to show you a few pieces, and the reason I do this is for a couple of reasons. One is my mother's an artist, but besides that, I wanted you to see this art. I was an undergraduate at Harvard, and when I was an undergraduate at Harvard, I took, if you wanted to study art from Europe, you went to the Fine Arts Department. And if you wanted to study art from Native America, you went to anthropology. And I say that because that reflects a valuation of people. And I believe that art reflects cultures, and this is our art. And you have to understand perhaps what it means, some of it, but I explained to you a couple things to look at because it reflects a worldview. And I think it also unto itself teaches us how to be better related, because that's what it reflects. What you see in here is a couple things I just want to point out to you. They call it X-ray. In the inside, you can see the inside of the beings. And then you see these lines that connect the beings together. And those are spirit lines. And it's a set of teachings that reflect that we are inner beings, but also that reflect the whole idea that we are all related. And I just wanted to say that so that you see that this art is a different form. I'm going to have you go to the next slide, which this is really old art. You guys have pictographs down here, or petroglyphs? These are pictographs. They're drawn on, yeah? And this is our Medewan, our religion, and this is on our reservation, but it is a current practice today. And I just put that there, but I wanted to show it to you because we had a discussion of Indigenous architecture, and you see that form there? So I had a quarrel, not surprisingly, with this guy in my community, actually. He was, I don't know how to say, you ever meet those people, they're kind of like Eeyore? Like, you can't do that, no. I said, we were going to make a hot house. You know what's it called? A hoop house, yeah? And he wanted to get the metal. You know this guy. He wanted to get the metal. I said, no, we make one like our lodge, just short. You know what I'm saying, a hoop house? I said, why do you want to bring metal from someplace else? Or PVC pipe? You make it like this, So now we have, I didn't get the pictures of that yet, but we have hoop houses we make like this, yeah? So you could take what was good and local and adapt it, and you'd be okay. All right, let me show you another. This is our territory, and this is a territory where some of those graphics come from, but just to give you an idea outside of your region. And my reservation is in northwestern Minnesota. And I think I got one more slide that kind of reflects worldview here. Oh, here, this is our ricing. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But this is some of our mythological beings. And this is a moon that we just finished right now. It's called Menominee-Jesus. It's a wild rice-making moon. And then the moon that follows, the one that's coming now, is called Watebaga-Jesus, which means leaf-changing color moon. And then we have Gashkadno-Jesus, which means freezing over moon. Yeah? Manadu-Jesus Soons, little spirit moon. Gishi-Manadu-Jesus, great spirit moon. Namebina-Jesus, a spirit moon. After that, Anabana-Jesus. That's my favorite. Maybe you could say that. Anabana-Jesus. Anabana-Jesus. I like how that sounds. That means a hard-crusted snow moon. That's the moon you don't want to do face plant in the snow. We could rename it occasionally like that. No faceplant moon. I don't know how to say that in Ojibwe. I'll work on it. I'll work on that when I get home, okay? And then we have our maple syruping moon that follows that, Wabagana-Jesus. That's a moon that follows that, which is flower moon. And then we have Odemina-Jesus, strawberry moon. We have Mean-Jesus, which is a blueberry moon. And then Menominee-Jesus, wild rice-making moon. And why did I tell you those? I thought you'd like to hear my language. And I thought also I wanted you to hear how we name moons after place and a king, land. Yeah? And did you notice that none of those moons is named after a Roman emperor? I just want to point that out. It is possible to have an entire worldview that has nothing to do with empire. And it's okay. You'll be okay. Just let that go. Okay. Well, that's a little bit about us and and who we are. And I think there's one more slide in here on this here. And this just shows a cyclical worldview, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later. But the idea that sustainability is essentially based on a cyclical worldview. It cannot be based on a linear worldview, economically or philosophically, because it is not durable. And this is us, and I thought, this is our seasons reflected like that, but then also I thought you'd like to see syllabics, that's what that's called, northern writing forms of Ojibways, Crees, and Inuits. That's what we have there. So that's a little bit about where I come from, just to let you know. But in that, there is a teaching of our prophets, and everybody had teachers who came to them. But a long time ago, these prophets came to us and instructed us what to do. That's what they do. And they told us about our migration, and they told us about what was going to happen, and, that they talked about how we would botch things up ourselves. I always say that because no society has a monopoly on botching things up. That's what we do. We're human. It's a question of if you have the humility and the commitment to fix it. That's what it really is. So it's a useless and kind of a lazy thing to feel guilty about being the ones who botch things up. You gotta just get it together and fix it, But in addition to that, in our teachings, they said that this time would come, was called the time of the seventh fire. And in that time, which is the time which is now, they say that these Anishinaabeg would have been born that would have gone through all the experiences of our oppression and everything what happened to us. But they call us the Ashki Anishinaabeg. They say that we would be the ones that, this generation would be the ones that would go and we would find things that were lost. Remember our languages and our songs, and we would go and get things that were lost. That's how they describe it, which I guess means like NAGPRA when you go to the museum and get back your stuff. And, I don't think those prophets knew about NAGPRA, but that's what they were talking about, And then, so then they said that we would be these people who would then be faced with two choices, two mikana. And one mikana, they said, was well-worn, but it was scorched. And the other mikana, the other road, two roads. The other road, they said, was not well-worn, and it was green. And it would be our choice upon which path to embark. And that's what they said a long time ago, our prophets. And so I say that because that is, I know where we are as Anishinaabeg people, but I also believe that that's really where America is. And you got a choice. The richest, most powerful country in the world, except for that large debt and the fact that China owns us. But aside from that, got a big military. You got choices. And it'd be our choice upon which path to embark. And there are two. One is pretty well scorched, and one is not. And, people here are talking about the one that is not. So I'm going to talk about my community and what we are dealing with there and how we are addressing these challenges in the broader context. Now, this fellow in the back helped me fix this PowerPoint, so it's just brand new, but I think I know what the next slide is. You want to go to it? Oh, good. So you were talking about climate change, John. And this, you don't need a lecture on it, but this is the village of Kivalina up in Alaska. It is falling into the ocean, as you see. This is what climate change looks like today in a native village in the north. And it's not isolated to that. It is widespread. So the issues that I am looking at in my community, which are the issues that I think are important to look at if you want to live for another 1,000 years, is climate change, peak oil, food security, and then, of course, this idea of how much is enough, the materials economy. Because those are all essential questions to sustainability. So this is what climate change looks like. Let's see what that next one is. Peak oil. I assume that you don't all need a lecture on this. I'm not going to lecture you on climate change. Is that okay? You guys good? Okay. Peak oil, basically this is the fact that we consumed, there is still oil out there, but we consumed a lion's share of the, or an American share of the world's oil resources in a short period of time. And what's left is, harder and harder to get. It is either the crack at the bottom of the ocean, down where you're going to do deep sea drilling, or it's in some country that might not want to give us their oil. And you already got a, $100 billion a year war for oil. Probably can't afford War II, for oil. or could be in, the next slide, could be in the tar sands, right? Which is where U.S. oil is coming from now. Vast majority of oil in Minnesota and increasingly the oil in the U.S. is coming from the tar sands. Single largest industrial project in world history. CO2 emissions higher than 97 nations, basically squeezing bitumen, which is, kind of a clay-like sand full of oil into a centrifuge, putting a bunch of chemicals in it, putting a bunch of water in it, spinning it around, and then shoving it in a pipeline. Then the pipeline is what they're trying to get through, and the Obama administration is supporting the Keystone Pipeline. And the pipeline, ironically, is not going to solve America's oil problems because the pipeline is headed towards export ports. So, in the testimony itself, it's clear that what Canada is interested in doing is increasing their access to markets. But this is the price of addiction, This is what it looks like, and you all know because you're part of the addicted oil economy. So this is where the oil is. Let's see what else we got here. And then once you get Canada, this is what the rest of it looks like. This is Shell's expansion of, tar sands. So that's just a little bit of an example of, the problem is that essentially, and in my assessment, the problem that we face is that we're the largest consumers of oil in the world, and we didn't really have a plan B on reducing oil consumption or transitioning in the face of declining reserves or declining oil. And so the problem is that when you are that big and you don't have a plan B, you end up in a situation where basically you're a junkie, which is us, right? We're pretty much a big energy junkie. Oil would be pretty much the foundation of it. And the problem with being a junkie as an economy, spending a vast amount of your resources on securing your fix, is that, when you're a junkie, you do a lot of bad stuff and hang out with a lot of bad dealers. And I think that's where we're at. And so the questions that I'm dealing with in my community, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later, are how you become less of a junkie and how you don't hang out with dealers and do bad stuff. It's just healthier. Okay, the next one. As we talk about the transition for the economy, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later. Isn't that a geeky slide? Do I get the award for the geekiest slide presented by a woman so far this year? I was presented this at the National Bar Association, Federal Bar Association a couple years ago, because they were citing all these court cases, just like by very slim citations. And I stood up there and I said, look, ha! So this is basically Lawrence Livermore Labs, which is, we'll go with not a left-wing think tank. Okay? This is like kind of a right-wing think tank. And basically between point of production and point of consumption, 57% of the energy is wasted. So one of the discussions, which is about a materials economy, as well as an energy economy in this country, is that why would you want to keep booting up or trying to fulfill that addiction when it's so inefficient? Because you can never fix it. You can never provide enough. And a lot of the arguments against renewable energy are that we cannot meet present demand. And the argument that needs to be made in return is why would we want to? So that's why I just present that slide, is the whole discussion and the reflection on what should be expected of an economic system if you want to be sustainable. And this current level of inefficiency is entirely unsustainable. Okay, now we'll go for the next slide, which is, this, is the question of the food economy. The average meal travels 1,500 miles from farmer to table. And I don't know how far it is here, but probably similar to northern Minnesota. We spend a great deal of time importing food, and by the time something gets to us, they say that it could be up to 10 kilocalories of energy in the food that we get 1 calorie out of, right? 10-to-1 ratio. And that is in itself also entirely unsustainable over the long haul, to basically slather petroleum so heavily on the food system, which is why it is unsustainable, in fact, the whole system in itself. Then the next slide. So this is what we are doing on my reservation. Now I'm going to get to my community. We did a study on my reservation on both food and energy. And in that, we looked at the question of how much money we spent and what it looked like. Now I'm going to show you some pictures of a little bit of my reservation because my community has a lot more local food than a lot of communities have, particularly wild rice. We are huge producers of wild rice. But unto itself, we do spend a good deal on food. And what we found is that of the $8 million on my reservation we spent on food, $7 million goes like that off reservation to Walmart, Food Service of America, Cisco, right? So it's like a leak, and it represents about a quarter of the economy of my community. Yeah? Similarly, the energy economy looks almost identical. That is to say that we spend 1/4 of our money on my reservation on energy. The national statistic is 1/5. My reservation, because it's colder, more remote, and nobody has a Prius, pretty much, right? You know, and everybody's got gas or propane heat. We spend 1/4 of our money on energy. And we're, you know, half the income. We hold, I think between us and Red Lake, there's always this competition of who's the poorest counties in the state of Minnesota. So that's where you get fuel poverty, which is you can't afford to pay your heating bill. And so that 1/4 of our economy we spend on food, and that 1/4 of our economy we spend on energy. If you're looking as a rural community about what to do for the future, the fact is that my reservation's 1/4 of its economy it spends on energy is spent almost entirely off reservation for gas vendors, fuel vendors, right? Because we don't have any dinosaurs. And so between the two of those, that represents 50% of your economy. Now, generally, a lot of rural communities, they're always saying, let's attract more jobs. Let's attract more investment. Let's attract more income into our communities. But no one deals with the fact that almost 50% of your economy is leaking. And that's what we're looking at in my community. It's an absolutely useless measure to keep trying to attract money that does not exist. When in fact, in your own community, it's like a sieve. Half of your economy is falling out. There's going on. So I'm going to tell you what we're trying to do about that in my community and what it looks like. Okay, let's see what we got for the next slide. Oh, this is the implications of the bad food economy. This is the kids, and I'm going to show you some pictures of these kids later. You know what a BMI index is? Basically, by the time they're in 8th grade, 50% of the kids are overweight. We have a higher statistic probably than a lot of other kids, but that is not 1/3 of the people on my reservation have diabetes. And I don't know what the price tag of that is, right? So if you're looking at this over the long term, what you're going to try to do is try to figure out how to solve it. And what we don't need is more federal programs or more money that is poured into, you know, getting us things that we don't need. What we needed to do is to get control. So I'm going to show you a little bit about that. Okay. Now let's see where we got to now. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about food. This is this guy named Ivan Curry. And we started to try to tackle restoration of local foods. And in that, we started first on our own heritage food varieties, or from our region. And we've been working on this for a number of years, and we work on corn. I'm working some on beans, but corn and squash are what we're working on the most in our community. So this is a Lakota squash. His father gave me that squash in October a few years ago, and I ate it in May. And the reason I'm telling you that, because my kids thought I was doing a science experiment. But the point is that the squash, I call it a low-carbon food. If you see what I'm saying. Because it didn't require refrigeration, didn't require freezing, didn't require canning. It just hung out in its own self. Happily. It's kind of like the little Zen squash. You know? And so, in itself, it's not just the local foods, but it's also what the foods are and how they're going to hang out if you aren't going to process them, right? So I like this Lakota squash, but then this year I upped that. Okay, now this is where the stories come in. Okay, can I see the next slide? These are really two cool squash. I know you guys are going to think I'm a little bit weird by the end of this lecture here, but we grew these squash. This is an Arikara squash, and I had to pull out this handy book to get my statistic on an Arikara squash for you. Okay, The Arikaras live on the Missouri River, right? And they're really good gardeners. But this one here has 13% of the recommended daily value of fiber, 64% of the recommended daily value for vitamin A, half the calories, and double the calcium and magnesium of the market equivalent. So it's not just a squash. It's somehow a lot of these old foods that are pre-industrial are much higher in nutritional value than anything you can buy at the store. And there's a few reasons for that. One might be just this depletion of soil, right? And the fact that if you're growing industrial foods, they're depleted. But another is basic plant breeding, from what I can figure. Because when they bred a lot of these things for the long haul, like beans or cucumbers or squash, they bred for, they would ship from California well. They would be uniform in production. They would respond in a uniform manner to spraying. They would, they were not bred for diversity. Yeah? And in that, somehow, I'm not sure, it seems like that they lost some nutritional value. And so that's why I always encourage people, when they look at relocalizing their food system, to look at the old varieties of food that are from your area. And that's them. And then this here, cool Gete okosaman, only Kevin knows what that means. And I don't know the name of the squash, but I just call it Gete okosaman, which means really old squash. Well, it actually means really cool old squash, because Gete is like a kind of a big thing. Anyway, so this squash was given to me, the seed. And what it was there was an archaeological dig near Oneida, Wisconsin, near the Oneida Reservation in Wisconsin. And in that dig, they went down there and they found a clay pot that was about the size of a tennis ball. It was a tennis ball, like a clay pot that was closed up. And the archaeologists pulled it out and they shook it to hear it. And then they shook it. They heard there was something inside it. And they broke the clay ball, and in it was these squash seeds. And the site was dated 800 years old. And in that clay ball were these squash seeds, yeah? And so I just want to say that because there's all this like super technology for saving seeds, like that thing in Norway. And this clay ball seemed to work pretty good for 800 years. So I just want to mention that. So if you want to do some local seed bank, as well as the Norway thing, try the clay ball. Anyway, so they gave that to the seeds to me a few years ago, and I didn't have, you have to have a good presence of mind to grow. I had a lot of crisis going all around me, so I didn't grow up. But this year, I made the squash. So this is my contribution, and it's about the 5th generation out of the clay ball. Or 6th generation, you understand what I'm saying? I didn't get the first one. I was like, don't give me nothing, till you guys really grow it good. I don't be the one Ojibwe who messed up the 800-year-old squash, but I did not. I saved it. And so that one, I didn't eat it yet. I'm waiting for our ceremonies, and I'm going to have it for our ceremonies because that seemed like a good thing to do. Okay, so that's my cool squashes. And then now I'll show you my next cool picture. This is our really cool corn. Now, I understand you guys have a short growing season. We have a short growing season, too. I don't know. I heard this painted mountain variety might grow down here. Did anybody try that yet? Really short growing season. But us, June to, we had our first frost last week. This week, Monday, yeah? So we're a little longer than you, and we have really long days. That's the difference between us and you. Ours are like really long summer hours, yeah? But, so what we wanted to do, well, there's a couple things in the story of this. First is, my father, he passed away a long time ago, about 20 years ago now. But he used to tell me, Winona, you're a really, really smart young woman, but I don't want to hear your philosophy if you can't grow corn. Which was a really interesting thing to say, but there's something in what he was saying. And in growing corn, I've learned a lot about a lot of things, And so I encourage you to think about your relationship to food in that way too, because it changes your relationship to the creation. That's what I would say. So we've been working to get these corn varieties that are from our region because they're cool and they're tough. So Jonesy Miller, he's from Menominee Reservation, but I gave him this seed. And this Bear Island Flint corn is from the reservation that Kevin in the front row is from. Do you want to do the wave yet? This is, it's a Bear Island, Flint. It's an island in the middle of a lake. And that these Indians grew this Ojibways grew this corn on. And it's a hominy corn. Do you know what pasoli is, right? Right, so it's like that. But it's a multicolored, and there's something in actually the colors that it's higher in certain nutritional value in the colors than in just a white corn. Yeah? I don't know exactly all that. But this corn grew on this island, and I know why they grew it on the island, because there was no predators in the summer, there was no deer, because they couldn't get out there. And it was kind of a microclimate, right? But anthropologists collected the corn, and I got this much from a corn grower, corn from the USDA. He gave me this much, like a handful, and now we have fields of it. And that's Jonesy's field, and the corn grows about this tall. And it's, what I like about it is that it grows this tall, and it has big ears on it, or different size ears, but those are pretty big, those ears. And it doesn't require fertilizer, doesn't require irrigation, frost resistant. When a big wind comes in, Monsanto's Roundup Ready corn tips over, my corn stands. So I tell you that because I think it is worth thinking about that when you're looking at climate change, what you grow is going to be really important. And so you got to grow tough guys. And that corn's a tough guy. And I never had a crop failure ever in this corn. Pink Lady, I just like growing it. And this year I had this long. I had ears this long. In my Pink Lady crop, it's a magenta colored flower corn. It's just stunning. And this corn here, I asked to tell this story because stories actually, I'm telling you stories, but some stories they belong to people. And so this is a Pawnee Eagle corn. And a long time ago, the Pawnees, they're related to the Arikaras. They came from up there, and then they moved down to, they were up there, and then they were living in Nebraska. And they grew this corn variety, and it's called Eagle corn, and you can see why it's called Eagle corn. And they had a whole bunch. They had about 8 varieties that were their special varieties they grew. And they had them, and then they went and they did really well with their corn. And then they even did well when their neighbors came in. You know, the non-Indian people came and settled in their area, and they didn't have too hard of a time. They got on with them pretty well. And I say that because Deb Echohawk is who told me the story. She said they used to call us like AAA. Call the Pawnees when your wagon wheel's broken, or your, horse is a little lame, or, whatever will help you out, And so they grew to be friends with their neighbors, the non-Indian ranchers who were in Nebraska. But the government was very mean to the Pawnees and a lot of other native people, and the government forced their removal to Oklahoma. And many of their people perished on the way to Oklahoma, and they moved there and they mourned everything that had happened to them, and they have a little town there called Pawnee, Oklahoma. And then they tried to grow their varieties, and their food didn't grow. And so they sat dormant for many years, and then in the 80s, they started trying to grow them out, and they just had a little bit left. Same thing, just a little bit left. And then they were sad. They mourned the loss of their relatives. That's what I would tell you. And then what happened is that this woman named Ronnie O'Brien from the Gateway Museum in Kearney, Nebraska. Is that how you say it? Kearney? Yeah. Kearney, Nebraska, called up Deb Echohawk and said, I'd like to try to grow some of your varieties out, because I have a really good garden here at the museum. And so they deliberated long, the Pawnees did, and in the end they said, well, we'll let them try. And so they sent their seeds, their precious seeds, back to Nebraska, and they flourished. And so they have restored many of their varieties to not the amount that they need, but to levels that they no longer mourn. And they reestablished a relationship with the descendants of those ranchers and farmers that their ancestors knew. And so I tell you that because corn is also about people and relationship, because corn does not exist unto itself. It is about relationship. And it is also, in this case, I believe, about redemption. And 2 years ago, they had Welcome Home Pawnee Days in Kearney, Nebraska, and 8,000 people came to welcome home the Pawnees. So I like to tell you that story because I'm really proud of where they are at and in supporting them in that. So I just got a couple more pictures of the corn. This is me and my cool corn this year. my Manitoba white flint corn. And that's, we're having a braiding competition. As you see, it's like French braiding. But they're doing good, those ladies. Okay, and then one more. And this is the 6th grade class. It's all boys in this school. They don't have a single girl in that class, and that's the whole class. So I had to teach those boys how to braid corn. Striped shirt didn't do so well in class, but the others did pretty good. But, you know, they're really proud, and I took those kids out picking corn, and they'd never done that. No, so this is our local food security program, is restoring those varieties, and our goal is to get enough so that our villages can eat, because we used to have thousands of acres of corn in our region, and in addition to our wild rice. Now, I don't know what the next slide is. That'll be a surprise to me. This is our second food, wild rice, and I don't know, guys, heard of this before? Grows on lakes and rivers. You harvest it with 2 sticks and a canoe. This is the time we are harvesting right now. It is a part of our migration story. We are instructed by our prophets to go to the place where the food grows upon the water. It is the only grain indigenous to North America, and it requires a pristine ecosystem to grow. And so this is our most sacred food and really defines us as Anishinaabeg. Where there is wild rice, there are Anishinaabeg, and where there are Anishinaabeg, there is wild rice. And it is a very important part of our community. Historically, it's always been a major source of our nutrition and then a source of trade for us. It's much higher in nutritional value than brown rice, twice the protein and twice the fiber and half the calories. It's good stuff, no gluten. But it also is a major part of our economy. And we've been battling for a number of years on this. The anthropologists came to see us. That's always kind of a bad story usually. And first they measured our heads, and then they came and looked at our rice. And they saw that what we did is we went out and harvested on the lake, and then we came in and danced, because you have to dance on your rice. You know, you harvest it and then you bring it in like these men are, and then you lay it out to dry and you parch it. And then here's parching, and then you could put it in like a big kettle and dance on it, like the grape thing, to get the husks off, or you can have a little machine that does that. And then after that, you blow it like a winnowing fan, a Nuskatchenagan, or you blow it. And then, but you always have to have a feast. We had our rice feast last week, and we had our rice powwow last week. But the anthropologists were perturbed because they said that we would never be civilized because we enjoyed our harvest too much, and that we enjoyed ricing too much, and that we were never going to be real workers. They called it like a Mardi Gras, the Ojibwe, and you know, it was really disappointing to them. And so the University of Minnesota, in its infinite wisdom, set out to domesticate wild rice and grow it in diked rice paddies in northern Minnesota, drain the paddy, use chemicals, fertilizers, and harvest it with a combine. And they did that beginning in the 60s. And today, it's a state grain of Minnesota, but today 75% of all wild rice that is on the shelf is coming from diked rice paddies in Northern California, grown with chemicals and fertilizers. We don't think that they should be able to call it wild rice. We think they should have to call it tame rice. Because it's not the same thing, you know, but it doesn't taste like a lake. And so we had battles first on the naming, and we won in the Minnesota on labeling, that they should be required to label it as paddy rice. But you got a loophole, which is California. You could drive the entire shipment of California through the national market. So like Uncle Ben's, most of these guys, even if you're food co-op, probably carrying California rice, you know. It's like a fair trade issue. And then our next round was on genetic engineering. And so far, no genetically engineered wild rice, although the University of Minnesota would like the right to genetically engineer wild rice. Our position is that wild should mean something, like not genetically engineered. You know, that it just makes no sense. So far we've won that battle, but it's going to be a few more battles left on that one, I'm sure. But I'm going to show you a couple more pictures on the ricing. This is a really cool photo from this year's harvest. It's what we just insert. So this is 1961 Mitchell Dam on our reservation, and this is 2011 Rice Lake Landing. And I just wanted to show you how significant the rice harvest is to our community. And the cars are different. Like, I don't even know the date on that, but I'm estimating around 61. And then this is here on Mitchell Dam this year. This is on Rice Lake Landing, 2011. And the average age of a ricer is probably about 23. And I say that to you because some people say that these traditions are dying. In our community, wild ricing, the most at-risk natives are the ones that are ricing. And I think that is worth a great deal. The idea that we value who we are. And so for us, the fight to have a fair price for our rice and the fight to be able to keep our rice from getting genetically engineered and to keep our lakes from getting full of sulfide mining, right, is why we fight for it, because it's so essential to us. Okay, I think, let's see, I don't know if I have any more photos of ricing. Let's see what I have. Oh, then this is just one last photo, which is kind of cool, battle that I was following. This is a potato. You guys grow potatoes down here too, huh? So this is called Peru Peru. It's a Maori potato, and the Maoris won the battle. You guys know who the Maoris are? Those guys in New Zealand. Those are some tough people, I'd say. You ever watch the All Blacks? I saw the rugby team out here today. Was that a rugby team I saw? You ever see them do the haka, the All Blacks? You guys should just, as a morning pep talk, watch the All Blacks haka. I do it sometimes just for the hell of it. Anyway, so if you don't want to mess with people you don't want to mess with are Maoris. After you watch the haka, you see why. Anyway, University of New Zealand wants to genetically engineer this potato. Maoris say no. They go 2 or 3 rounds. In the meantime, they find, and they didn't get a genetically engineer, but they find that this potato has the highest rate of Andean genetics of any potato in the Pacific. And what's that mean, right? It means that those Maoris, pre-Captain Cook, were cruising around the Pacific, right? Which is what they were doing, and brought that potato home, and they got that. And so these issues are not of food security, are not just local. They become, international issues as well. Okay, I think I'm done on my food things. Let me see the next slide. So this is what we're doing in terms of renewable energy. So we're trying to relocalize our food economy, but with our own local food. But at the same time, what I'm trying to explain to you, which I think I've imparted, is that you have to fight. Don't expect that you will just be able to relocalize your food. You also have to keep your eye on what's going on in the big picture. This is what we are doing in terms of renewable energy. This is my community has class 4 wind. It's not the windiest community, just a little bit west of us. A lot of Indian reservations are very windy, but ours is a pretty darn windy reservation. And the town that this is in is the windiest town on the reservation. So what we decided to do is to put up a wind turbine that's going to provide power to our school. It's a 75 kilowatt lowland wind turbine. And I'm telling you the size because generally in this country there's 2 sizes of wind. One is very small and one is very large. And this is the size that powers a school, which makes it a lot more accessible to your community, and I think it's appropriately scaled technology. And this is my grandson here, Giwaden Bakanaga. I just want you to note he is outside of the yellow line. But this is us putting up this wind turbine, and the guy on the top, and the other reason I'm showing you this is that the guy on the top is a veteran. This is Tony Tibbetts. He's putting up this wind turbine, and I met him a few years ago, 26 years in the military. I said, what you do in the military all those years? A lot of stuff I probably didn't like. He says, I'm in demolitions. I says, do you have a degree in demolitions or you just blow up stuff? He says, no, I have a master's in engineering. I said, well, can you build anything? And he said, yeah. I said, well, how about that? And so this was re-engineered, and structurally engineered to go up like this, and that's the guy hanging out the top. But I wanted to say that because you got a lot of veterans in this country. You got a high rate of people who get a skill set. And when that skill set comes back to this country, they are often not reintegrated into the green economy. But the reality is that they have some of the most adaptable and most relevant skills for the green economy. And I'm mentioning this because I know you're all really smart young people, and some of you are older people too. But sometimes you get out of a liberal arts college, and I'm not sure what skills you have, quite frankly. And so the question is in the end important to have some kind of skills that are handy. So this is our turbine. It's going to power our facility. Let me see what else I got here. This is it going up. This is in Ojibwe. You get to say Ujitunada, which means let's build it. And then finally, last one here, Inashke, which means tada, in Ojibwe. And so that's what we're doing in my community. My theory is if we can do it, anybody can do it. Nobody would bet on us. We have every statistic you don't want to have, but we are determined to do this in our own community. Let's see what else I got. I got just a couple more slides here. This is on the Navajo reservation here. I worked on this project. I just raised the money for it, but I had no idea it was so big. This is Dene College. This is, I think, their natural resources building. I don't know if any of you down there from the front row, do you guys know this building? Seen it? But anyway, that's a 25 kilowatt solar install, scaled up. You guys are all familiar with this. You probably don't need me to tell you this, but that's what we're working on. And then the last, this is the potential of Indian country. Turns out that Indian reservations are the windiest place in the country. Go figure out how that happened. And so our theory is that's a way better plan, is wind and solar than anything else that they got going for us. So I'm going to go, I think I just have one more slide or so here. Okay. I want to use this as my last, but what I want to say to you is, things take a while to work out. I have been working for 30 years in my community, and I haven't accomplished everything, but when you're thinking about your plan, the story, people make stories and people make history. It's not made by other people. It's the people's actions and your prayers and just putting a good thought into it. It takes a while. A lot of you are young and you're conditioned to believe, if you watch enough TV, that things are solved within the 48 minutes that you watch on TV. Character development, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then we're done. It takes a long time to make change. Think about what Mike Wiggins said. Are you going to plan to be around a long time? And recognize that stories take on their own, they have their own power unto themselves. And so when you're working on something, sometimes it may not end up how you thought, or it may not happen how you thought it was going to happen. But be flexible enough to not get stuck. Because a lot of I would say almost the psychosis of this generation is that we believe we're right and there's one way. And that's not true. There are many ways, and a lot of times we as humans are not actually smart enough to figure that out on our own. You got to do a little bit of it comes as you work on it. Also, don't be afraid to learn from, the ancestors and what was here. As you reflect, if you're from this area, on what to grow, consider what those old people grew here, or how things changed, or what we can learn from that. I know that in America, the inference is generally that Indigenous people did not know much. That's why, white people came and fixed things up for them. And that's actually not true. There's a lot of knowledge that we have, and a lot of it, like those old squash and vegetables, is really worth something, to consider that. But in the end, not in the end, but this slideshow was originally presented in Aotearoa, or New Zealand, or parts of it were. I just took it apart. And I was there with these two countries were there. It was an international conference on economics. There was 43 countries represented, and I'm an economist, actually, by training. And so these countries were there, Vanuatu and Costa Rica. And I don't know if you know what they share, but they won the Happy Planet Award for being the happiest countries in the world. Did you guys know this? You know what I'm talking about, these countries? So they have different quality of life indicators. In their case, it's not level of consumption, right? It's not how many cars or, how much, essentially what we have is a highly excessive materials economy. And it turns out that owning all that stuff doesn't actually make you happy. It makes you largely in debt, from what I could figure. And in these other countries, quality of life was based instead on the idea of the security of your relationships. If you had good food, if you had access to the land and the land was good, or the sea and the sea was good, if you had that security of access, if you had good health care, if you had, good, the women were safe. These were the indicators that they had. And in those countries, Vanuatu and Costa Rica, they were considered the happiest countries in the world. But Vanuatu was ousted by Costa Rica last year. And so I had to remind Vanuatu and ask them what had happened. I said, why you lose your position? And they said it was faulty data, actually. That was their response. But Costa Rica, interestingly enough, has won the happiest country in the world award, and they have no military. So I just want to point that out. But these indicators that I'm talking about are not new age indicators. We could say that these indicators hearken from these teachings that Anishinaabeg have of two choices, one path well scorched and one green. We could also, I'm going to read you a quote, which is, our GNP is now at $800 billion a year, 1968. It counts air pollution and cigarette advertising, ambulances to clear our highways of carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and the jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of the redwoods and the loss of our natural wonder to chaotic sprawl. It counts nuclear warheads, armored cars for police to fight riots in our cities. It counts Whitman rifles and spec knives, which I was thinking was the equivalent of semi-automatic weapons today. And the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys. The GNP does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It does not account for most things which we consider to be of value. That quote came from Robert F. Kennedy in 1968. These questions of what is to be valued and where we go as a society are worth considering at this point that we are at now. We have always had the opportunity, and here we are, this rich and powerful country with the choices ahead of us. We have no absence of technology to address the issues. What we have quite often is an absence of political will. We have no need, in many cases, to have more technological solutions when the answer is right at hand. That is, whether it is relocalizing food systems, cutting your consumption to a level that is efficient, and creating renewable energy so you have a local economy rather than an internationally dependent petroleum economy. It does not require a recalibration of technology as much as it requires a recalibration of thinking into itself. And in the end, we are faced with this opportunity to do the right thing. Each generation and each set of people is given that shot. I feel like we're the people that can keep them from fracking every aquifer in the West. We're the people that can keep them from taking down every mountain in northern Wisconsin for some, iron ore they're going to ship to China, right? Or, digging or sucking every bit of petroleum out of the ecosystem. It takes a commitment, it takes a set of strategies, and it takes work. And in the end, we end up with this shot at being spiritually great people at this moment in time, which we have. So in closing, I just want to thank you for the opportunity of addressing you and saying that, I'm going to go home to my community, which is where this is. We're actually on Leech Lake here, and this is me throwing down the gauntlet for Costa Rica and Vanuatu, saying, give me 5 years and we're going to be the happiest country in the world. That's our flag. I'm like, you come and get me then. No. Come visit. But it is the opportunity to be happy communities that rests in front of us. So, miigwech miu. Thank you for your time.